right. Well, it's right at 2 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today at Gravitas Impact Premium Coaches Global Business Leaders Forum. I'm Sarah Davenport. I'm the Director of Education for Gravitas, and today we will be discussing from running your business to turning your flywheel, how to create enduring greatness. We also have our presenter today, our Gravitas certified coach, Paul Cronin. Paul is a managing partner with Cornerstone 3. He is a leader in organizational design, strategy, and strategic execution. Paul works with mission-driven entrepreneurs to build great and valuable businesses through organizational design, elite teams, unique strategies, and operational excellence. Within months, vision is turned into executable strategy and complex problems into simple solutions. The organization's team of teams collaborate to consistently make strategically smart decisions with everyone aligned and accountable to those decisions. He is also an expert in business transition planning, exit strategy planning, conflict management, and succession planning. Paul is a turnaround expert who has successfully led the transition and succession of 7 organizations. His professional background includes CEO of 5 closely held companies, company president, entrepreneur, and business advisor. He started his career with Coopers & Lybrand, Sheraton Hotels, and Merrill Lynch Pierce, Finner & Smith. He went on to become EVP and regional manager for Earth Technology. He was partner at the Platinum Group, a Midwest turnaround firm, for 6 years before he started his own business advisory firm, Cornerstone 3. Paul is a graduate from Boston College with a Bachelor's of Science in Accounting. He has worked closely with entrepreneurs for over 26 years. Paul, now I will turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I appreciate the introduction. It's very kind of you. Good afternoon, coaches and others who will be listening to this presentation online through video later on. I'm really excited about turning the flywheel. Jim Collins obviously spent a lot of time in this and came out in his first book, Good to Great, in 2001. And then he was challenged by the Amazon folks during the .com bomb, where they had some difficult decisions to make, and they invited him up there. And in that workshop and that time together, Collins learned more about what he actually discovered through his education and studying these companies and these companies that had flywheels. And Amazon took this to the next level. And so when you think about what Jim did, this presentation really talks about his work and his discoveries. And we've just turned it into a presentation to use with our clients, and for our clients to really understand the underlying architecture of what truly creates a great organization or getting to greatness. So when you look at the outputs of greatness, when you look, let me go back one slide here. One of the things that he talks about, or he repeatedly talks about in this process, is the flywheel is not a silver bullet. It's not a one idea or a panacea. It's really the opposite of that. It's about having that focus and commitment to start and continue to push that giant heavy flywheel. And again, that metaphorically, it's like we don't even realize we're doing that. And he created a metaphor to help us understand as business owners what we're doing here. And the key is staying focused and relentlessly committed. Turn after turn, the flywheel builds momentum. And at some point in time, you have a breakthrough. And it flies forward with incredible, nearly unstoppable momentum. Right. And, when I think about the coaching industry, at least in my experience, it took me 3 years to get off the ground. My first year I had 1 client, my second year I had 2, in my third year I had 5. And then at that point in time, all the things I was doing, sticking with it, being committed to it, it took off. In the 3rd, 4th year, things really started to happen. And since that time, there's been that consistent flywheel, as long as I stay committed to it. And that's it. As coaches, I always say the hardest thing in coaching is not the fact that you're a great coach or not. It's getting started and getting that momentum and sticking with it and building your business, cycle after cycle, step after step. And that's the hardest thing for new coaches coming on board, because it's really not coaching. It's really about marketing and sales, isn't it? When you're first getting building your brand. So the flywheel is very applicable to us and what we do as coaches, and likewise in business, right? Depending on your particular circumstances, in understanding the underlying architecture of your business and focusing with great creativity and discipline. So Collins talks about when you do that, you end up getting what he calls strategic compounding. And again, it's you're compounding relentlessly over and over and over again to build up a series of great decisions, supremely executed, and they compound upon each other. And as you do that, you build greatness. He also points out that the flywheel is not the only thing. It comes within a framework of principles, right? And so the overarching concept is discipline. And discipline separates the great from the mediocre. He continually reminds us of that. So it's up to us. It's up to us as leaders to discover our business model and then stick with it. And one of the things we find out as coaches, and for the business owners who are listening, those visionaries, right? Often visionaries have a difficult time not chasing the squirrel, not going after the shiny object. And so one of the things as coaches, our job is to help you stay focused. Your job is to stay focused. And when you have that self-discipline in the inner will, you'll end up with great outcomes, regardless of how difficult. Collins talks about who first, then what, and it really starts with us. Let me address the inputs or the framework to the flywheel concept. So when you think about the great inputs to the I'm on the wrong slide again. I'm sorry. When you think about the great inputs to the flywheel, I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit difficulty with my PowerPoint here. Technologically, sometimes I make a few mistakes. You're looking at disciplined people, disciplined thought, and disciplined action. And so you can see that word discipline, 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 right? And when you stay disciplined, then you're going to be successful. Within disciplined people, he helps us realize that level 5 leadership is critical. So everything starts with us as the leader, making sure that we are making good decisions, that it's not all about us, that we're bringing people onto the team. He points out that a company is not valuable if and when it is it's about you, right? It's really about making sure that it's about the team. And that's where he says, so as leaders, we have to look to first who, then what. So we want to build a team of A players. We want to build a team of people who can work well together. And when we do that well, we can then move to the second area, and that is disciplined thought. And this still comes with great leadership, right? Because if you're not willing to commit to dealing with the brutal facts and confronting the brutal facts, not in a negative way where you're attacking each other, but just dealing with the facts, because the funny thing about facts is that they don't lie, they're the truth. And when you're willing and mature enough to deal with those brutal facts, you'll stay on focus, you'll stay disciplined, and you'll get great results. And so it's dealing with those facts. And then the second thing on disciplined thought is the hedgehog concept. And in that hedgehog concept, many of us already know about that. And there's a couple of things that are critical to that. And that is, what are we passionate about? We talk about having passion. That passion helps us to stay disciplined, right? The other thing is, what can we be the best in the world at? And then what's our economic engine? So that hedgehog concept is critical in the center focus of our flywheel. And then the third area is what is discipline action, right? And that discipline action comes with a culture of discipline. And this is where we can look again at some of the things that Collins talks about in some of his other books. He talks about the 20-mile march. And that is that consistency of creating a plan for a quarter, then a year, and then 3 years, and then 10 years, and just repeating that march over and over, not going too fast, too far, or not going too slow, is regardless of what's going on, you dedicate yourself in good times or in bad times to that keeping steady on that 20-mile march. Self-imposed, rigorous performance, right? With targets that you have to hit with relentless consistency. That's the 20-mile march, right? It amongst disorder and chaos like we've had this year, it allows us to stay disciplined and consistent amongst that uncertainty. So for a time like we've been living through in this pandemic, that 20-mile march for us and for our clients, we have to stay focused on that. When you think about extending the flywheel, or you want to stay creative, but you also want to remain disciplined. And one of the things he talks about is the power of the and versus the tyranny of the or. A lot of times we have a mindset that it's this or that. And he says the genius is really in the and, the ability to hold two opposing views in your head at the same time. And so when we talk about extending the flywheel through a culture of discipline and discipline action, he talks about firing bullets, then cannonballs. And so the concept there is don't take all your powder and put it into one cannonball and fire it because you're not understanding things, or you just feel supremely confident. You want to fire bullets and recalibrate, and fire bullets and recalibrate. And the metaphor there is you're using smaller amount of weaponry, smaller amount of resources to get gauged in and see whether or not you're hitting your target. And then once you start hitting your target with these small proven ideas, which are the bullets, you can then turn that into a huge success by then firing the cannonball. But you want to fire the bullets and calibrate first. So that disciplined action comes along with the disciplined thought and the disciplined people. So it's interesting that when you look at the outcomes of breaking through, what do we get when we find the architecture of our flywheel? What do we get when we have the creativity and the discipline and we stick through and we finally get that momentum going? We get unbelievable output. So a little bit of Steve Covey here is starting with the end in mind. When we're talking to ourselves as coaches, when we're talking to our clients, the output is greatness. And how do we define greatness, and how Jim calls greatness is superior results, distinctive impact, and lasting endurance. And so superior results are two things, right? We have to accomplish our purpose and our mission. Otherwise, we're not fulfilling that, and that's not good. So it's fulfilling our purpose, fulfilling our mission. And the other thing that businesses have to do well is financial results as measured by a return on invested capital. So the bottom line is, to be truly great, you have to be great at your chosen game. So that's superior results. Distinctive impact is how are we touching our communities and the people around us? So making a distinct contribution to the communities that you touch, performing with excellence, and that's both to your internal customers, your employees, to your outside customers, your clients and your customers, and into your supply chain. So and into your ownership group, anybody who's in relationship with you, how are you performing with excellence? How are you showing up? And the last question is that if your organization disappeared, the absence would be deeply felt, and it wouldn't be able to be filled by another organization. When you've reached that, you've had a really distinct impact. And I just take a moment here to recognize Tony Hsieh, who passed away recently around Thanksgiving. When you think about the absence our business community has by missing him, after creating a number of fantastic companies, and his focus on culture and his focus on happiness and people, I mean, there's a huge gap that we're now missing in his absence. Size does not matter when it comes to distinctive impact. Only the impact matters. So you could be a very small restaurant or a boutique business, and you're bringing great impact, or you can be a very large organization creating big impact. So the size isn't the matter. And the last thing is lasting endurance. A truly great organization prospers over time. Another author that speaks to this is Simon Sinek, when he talks about the infinite game and the mindset required to play an infinite game versus a finite game. As coaches, we should all read this book and have our clients read The Infinite Game, because it changes their mental perspective. It helps them realize that, going to Jim Collins's first book, Built to Last, that a real true company has lasting endurance beyond any one individual or any one idea. And that gets us back to the hedgehog concept. The hedgehog concept, in turning that flywheel, should be able to go on in perpetuity with proper maintenance and proper culture. These organizations, they transcend dependency on any excuse me, on any what I call hero leader. Hero leadership is not where companies get greatness. It's when the leader actually, as Stanley McChrystal says in his book Team of Teams, when the leader stops becoming the leader and starts creating an ecosystem for others to flourish. And Liz Wiseman talks about in Multipliers, where we're actually multiplying genius rather than having to have all the answers. So if your organization cannot grow without you, then it is not yet a truly great organization, and that you have to see yourself as that constraint to growth. So a little bit of what's positive, a little bit of what's negative in lasting endurance. Let's take a quick look at the hedgehog concept just to see it visually. When we look at the hedgehog concept, it's the intersection of three circles. And the first circle is your purpose, your why. Why do you exist? So important to answer this question. And we know Simon Sinek is like the iconic person who's focused on defining why and helping individuals and people define why. Why is about your significance, personally and as a company and in your community. So this is one of the most important. In Jim Collins's first book, Built to Last, he says this is immutable. And it doesn't matter what business you're in. Your why should always be your why, and it never changes. Likewise, it's not noted here, but your core values, how we behave, is likewise immutable. How we show up and how we behave is the foundational strategy to any great organization. It's the rock that we build the business upon and build our lives upon. The second circle is about what you can become the best in the world at. And becoming the best in the world is something that's a lot of people have a hard time getting their minds around. But it's not that you are, but that you believe that you can, and you're striving towards it, and you have a game plan to get there. Because if you can't be the best at something, then you're really not going to have a great hedgehog concept. It's all about not being, from a strategy perspective, better. It's about being unique and different. And then what drives our economic engine? This is the ratio of revenue or gross profit or profit per X, right? And X is what we want more of, and that's what grows our business. So defining our economic engine helps us define and identify the decisions that we make based on growing our business. And the final thing that connects them all is our big, hairy, audacious goal. All the way that's what a term that Collins shared with us and coined. Another way of looking at it is your Northern Star. It's big, it's hairy, it's directional. One of the most famous ones out there is Microsoft, a computer on every desk. And when you hear Bill Gates talk about thinking big, he says if he didn't set that big, hairy, audacious goal, that Northern Star, Microsoft would have never become the company that it's become. But that Northern Star that challenged everybody, it became part of the culture. And every day, every week, every month, every quarter, they kept looking forward on that, and they were aligned to it. So that hedgehog concept is critical to the second phase and falls within the framework of disciplined people, disciplined thought, and disciplined action. The warning sign here is when we think about what we talked about, discipline, leadership. There's an article in 1999, before Good to Great came out, by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ram Charan in Fortune magazine of June of 1999. And he studied the iconic CEOs of the time of the Fortune 1000. And his article was Why Do CEOs Fail? And the lesson here is that CEOs did not fail because they lacked strategy. They failed because they weren't able to execute their strategy. And, as coaches, we always say, well, what's the root cause of that? Not being able to execute is a fairly ambiguous term. So let's get more specific. And he said, well, 70% of the reason CEOs fail is bad execution. And the reason why they fail is they fail to put the right people on the bus and the right people on the seat, in their seats. So right then and there, the flywheel concept will never become reality if we don't understand that it's us as leaders that have to step up to the plate first and allow this to happen and think differently about how we lead. The sad thing about his study was that, Jim Collins says first two, and then what? In other words, right people, right seats. But these CEOs knew they did not have the right people in the right seats, and they didn't do anything about it. And so I know in my coaching career, over 12 years and working with over 60 clients, how many times have I seen very smart CEOs and leaders not address what we refer to in the coaching industry as the C player. The C player is someone who doesn't live the core values and doesn't perform well. And they allow those people to exist inside their organization. As long as we have a culture like that, and a company like that, we will fail to be able to achieve a flywheel. And then the second most important thing is if we don't have our hedgehog concept in place, which is the center of our flywheel and where we focus all our time, then we'll end up in what we call the doom loop. And the doom loop is where we try things and we get disappointing results. And then because we don't have a hedgehog, we're not focused on becoming the best in the world at something. We're not focused on a mission or a purpose, or we're not focused on an economic reality that drives our economic engine. We react without understanding to, right here, right? We react without understanding to the results. And then what do we look for? We look for that panacea, that silver bullet, new direction, a new program, a new leader, right? Or a new fad or acquisition, right? And then we try to get momentum, but no momentum builds up because there's no rationale, there's no architecture behind it. And we get into this disappointing results and we perpetuate a doom loop. So as coaches, how many times have you walked into a business and you've seen that? As a turnaround person for 6 years, and also being, the hired gun for a number of owners earlier in my career, I saw this happening all the time. Of course, when I was younger, I didn't understand why. As I got older and became a coach, I understood much more that it was the doom loop, that they didn't have the disciplined thought, the disciplined leadership, the disciplined action. They didn't have a hedgehog concept. So let's talk about success now. The flywheel starts with the right step, consistent with the hedgehog concept. So the hedgehog concept is what we're focused on. We have to know what our purpose is. We have to know what we can become the best in the world at. We have to know our economic engine. And then we start pushing on that flywheel. We start putting the shoulder to it and we get that one turn. And we start doing 2 turns and then 10 turns and then 100 turns. And we're accumulating visible results. We're gaining confidence. As that happens, our people inside the organization line up and get energized by it. Our marketplace in which we're working, our customers line up and they start talking about us and they start saying, that's a great company. Look at their product. Look at their service. That person's a great coach. And we keep pushing. And now we're at 100 turns and then 1,000 turns, right? And we keep building momentum and steps forward consistent with the hedgehog concept. And it turns and it turns and it turns. And what Collins learned through his study of over 5,000 companies, it was those companies that they stay focused on the hedgehog. They stayed focused and disciplined on turning that flywheel to 1 billion turns, to 10 billion turns. Those are the successful companies. versus the ones that were looking for the next silver bullet, the next great idea. And the thing is, and this is the genius of the and, it doesn't mean you don't have great ideas. It just means that you stick turning to the flywheel and then you include that idea in there. And I'm going to explain that as we go through some of the case studies here. So let's move forward. Right. One last thing on greatness is not a function of circumstance. Greatness is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline. So it goes back to leadership and what we as leaders have to do. So Amazon was the first company that really engaged Collins and took him up on this new book that came out in October of 2001, and said, "Hey, Jim, we're getting impacted by the dot-com bomb. This flywheel thing seems really interesting. How can we really take what you're talking about and become great at it?" Because, Bezos and his leadership, the guy's always challenging everybody to think great, to think big, to scale to 10x. And they started asking questions, right? What does our flywheel look like? What are the components of our flywheel? What's the sequence of the flywheel that makes sense? They started challenging themselves and asking. And so when you look at this flywheel, they realize, well, what is attracting people to come to Amazon? And they realized low prices and the fact that we keep adding more offerings. So their honeypot, if you will, or the bee to the flower, or the bear to the honeypot, right? What's the attraction? Well, low prices and more offerings. So that's the first logical step. Okay, well, if we have low prices and more offerings, what catapults us to the next step? What's the next component where we move forward with energy? What's the most logical thing? It's like, well, if we have that, we're going to increase customer visits, right? Absolutely. So now we have more customer visits. What's the next logical steps where we get catapulted forward with momentum and energy? Well, if we have these kind of eyeballs, if we have increased customer visits and all people are coming here, what's going to happen next? Well, more and more people are going to want to sell their products and services on our site. So we're going to attract third-party sellers. Okay, well, what happens then? Well, now that we have third-party sellers, we have more products. We have to expand the store. We have to extend distribution. Right? We have to accommodate our back office operations and fulfillment center. Okay, well, what do we do when we do that? Well, we have to grow revenues so we can take those extra fixed costs and spread them out. And again, it's a return on assets, right? We have to have a high asset utilization play here. So to have a high asset utilization play, we have to grow the revenues. Okay, so then as we do this, what's the next thing we do? Well, offer low prices on more offerings. And you can see that it just keeps turning and keeps turning and keeps turning, right? And they just stick with it and they stay focused. Bezos is so focused as a leader. When he started, he studied the industries that he thought he could win at, and he decided to go into books because he said, there's so many books in the world, but we don't have enough capacity physically to carry all those books. People would go into bookstores and say, I'd like to get this book, and no, we don't have it, we'll order it for you. And so he says, well, if that's the case, I can carry every book in the world in a virtual setting, right? And so he started his business on books for that very reason. And then as people said, hey, Jeff, this is a great model. Why don't you start offering more things? He said, not until I create the best online experience. So that's the first thing he did. He stayed radically focused to that. And then once he had built that radical online experience where everybody loved it, then he started adding more offerings. And then the flywheel continued to spin and turn. Another two examples are Vanguard and Intel. And you can see, I'll take one at a time, but you can see a similar pattern. So Vanguard is a mutual fund site, right? They offered low-cost mutual funds. So again, we're playing with, it's a price play, right? And when you're going to compete on price, you have to then manage expenses, right? It's just a logical thing in order to make cash. So they're going to offer low-cost mutual funds. they're going to deliver superior long-term returns for clients. So they believe that what's most important to their core customer are long-term returns, right? And so they had to build these funds, and they had to prove that out. And as they did, they built strong client loyalty. And with that came assets under management growing. Well, when you grow assets under management, you're making more management fees. So again, you're able to grow based on economies of scale. Same as Amazon did. A low-cost competitor business model has to have economies of scale. And so then they offered more low-cost mutual funds, and they delivered superior performance. They built strong loyalty. They grew on assets under management, and they had more economies of scale. So those Amazon and Vanguard are very similar in their flywheel, and that constant turning was the most important thing in keeping their flywheel going. Intel was a little bit different. Their attraction was designing new chips that customers crave. So back in the 80s and 70s, right, when this was all coming out, memory chips were the way to go, and they were top of their class in memory chips. And so they said, okay, we're going to design new chips that customers crave. They kept their prices high because they knew their chips were unique and different, right? And they kept this high until competition started catching up. But as they were keeping their prices high, they were also driving down their cost to manufacture those chips because they were attracting more and more customers. And so manufacturing became more efficient, right? So there's economies of scale happening here. And then they harvested those profits and they put them back into R&D. And the cycle for creating chips back then was about 18 months. So they continue to start working on their 18-month lead time to create new chips. So they reinvest in profits into R&D, and they come out with a new chip, and they go through the cycle again. And the architecture followed. So you can see again, what attracted people was the new chip. So the R&D model is represented by Intel. But now I'm going to explain to you the Intel model in a second way, extending your flywheel. So this is where creativity and discipline, right? The genius of the and come together. So in the 80s, there was a price war around memory chips and Intel literally would have exploded and gone out of business. So, but they had been working on the microprocessor chip since the late 70s and early 80s. And so that it was a small percentage of revenue in 81 when they decided to go all in on the microprocessor because they didn't want to end up in a price war. So what did they do? They looked at their flywheel. They didn't throw their flywheel out the window. They just said, hey, listen, microprocessors can respond the same way within our flywheel. So the flywheel, it goes beyond any product or any idea. The flywheel is the underlying architecture to what makes your business work. In their case was designing new things. So now they're designing new microprocessors. They price them high before competition catches up. They drive down unit costs. They create economies of scale. They harvest profits before prices fall. They reinvest into R&D, and they come out with more microprocessors. So they use the same flywheel to go ahead into a new industry of microprocessors. And then that's where the Intel Inside came about, right? And the rest of the story is there. So the takeaway on this one is the true value in the flywheel is it's the architecture of your economic engine. And it's not dependent on one idea or one thought or one product. Does that make sense, I hope, to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at another example. And here is the thought here is Giro, as a small startup company that made sporting goods, initially a bike helmet, particularly. They too were a invention first company. So they invented great products. Right now, these guys were young entrepreneurs. And the point here is that you don't have to always discover your own flywheel. You may be able to learn, right, on the coattails of others. So what did Jim Jentz, the founder of Eero, do? He looked at Nike and he studied the underlying essential insights, those commercial insights of the Nike flywheel. That there's a hierarchy of social influence for athletic gear. So he realized that. He took Nike's flywheel, he made it his own, he added a step in here, and the step is get elite athletes to use them and then inspire weekend warriors. So the weekend warrior concept was an addition, right? And then attract mainstream customers, where Nike's goes right to elite athletes to mainstream. So he added a step in there. But what he did, he took his very meager resources and he sponsored Greg LeMond to wear his helmet in the 1989 Tour de France. And LeMond happened to win that year, right? He won 5 of them, I believe, but he came from like 50 seconds back to win. And because of that, Euro took off. And it all of a sudden became cool to wear a bike helmet as long as it was a Giro, right? So again, the flywheel architecture can be borrowed from other great companies to apply to yourself. You don't have to figure it all out on your own if there's some commonality in the industry. Okay, so the flywheel in concept is to attract believers, right? To build strength, right? And in the building strength, it's about adding people, and clock building. Clock building comes from built to last. It's about building a system rather than building a fad or one idea. Demonstrating positive results, right? Mission success and profitable trend lines. And then building your brand, which is your reputation and the emotion around who you are. And then doing it some more, right? And keeping that flywheel moving, all focusing on the hedgehog concept that you've created. Now, as I say that, I'm going to throw a curveball at you, and I'm going to show you a couple of different flywheels that the first step, you might debate whether or not you're attracting believers, depending on who you think the believers are. So when you go to Cleveland Clinic, their mission is to do what's best for the patient. They realized that being normal or casual or average in the medical business was not going to do what's best for the patient. They knew that they had to have great medical professionals. So their first step in the flywheel was to go out and get the right medical professionals. Now you say, well, Paul, how is that attracting, customers? Well, frankly, that wasn't attracting customers. It was attracting the right professionals. So when you start thinking about a service offering, right, and most of your cost is labor from professionals, right, you might think about this flywheel to look at. So then they cultivated a collaborative, patient-centered culture, just like, the Mayo Clinic, right? And so again, if we're going to do what's right for the patient, then we have to turn the medical model upside down. And what would be great? Well, we should all look at the patient, not one doctor, but we should all evaluate the patient and look at the whole patient as a whole and all their different systems, because we're all experts in different areas of the body. And then they worked across specialties for best health outcomes. So they agreed on a culture of collaboration, right? And then because of that and the results that they got, they attracted patients from around the world. So that's when the customer started getting attracted to say, yeah, if I'm going to spend my money, I might also go to the best. And as that happened, it fueled the resource engine to attract more doctors and more capital. And they invested in the best facilities, research, and people. So it seemed like the starting point was a little bit different than with the customer, and it is, but it makes sense when you think about that underlying commercial insight in architecture. And then another one like that, and this flywheel, 2 reasons for this one. It proves the point of attracting passionate people to a service offering business model, but it also proves it doesn't have to happen at a high level. The Ware Elementary School was started by a supervisor, a principal who said, we want to be the best for our kids. Well, how are we going to be the best for our kids? Similar to Cleveland Clinic, they went out and they said, let's attract teachers infused with passion. And the problem they had was, frankly, the great teachers were too expensive and they couldn't attract them. So they said, okay, what do we want to look for new teachers coming out of education and they haven't really taught yet? We're gonna use a criteria called they're infused with passion. And their hiring process was looking for passionate teachers. And they knew that passion would come through and they'd figure things out. So they built collaborative improvement teams, knowing that teams are better than individuals. And Stanley McChrystal proves that in his book, Team of Teams. So teams are one step greater than A players. It's A players who play well together. And then they started assessing student progress early and often. So it wasn't just once a quarter or once a trimester. They continually worked with the students. They achieved learning faster and higher quality for each and every kid. Of course, that enhanced their reputation as a great place for parents to send their children. And as that happened, they replenished the passionate teacher pipeline. So you can see how this flywheel, this underlying architecture, created a great school that attracted kids and parents. So that's the overview of the flywheel. So I'm going to stop right now. And so based on the concepts, we've got 20 minutes left. Are there any key questions that, or revisits that you have out there that you would like me to review before we go into how do we do a workshop? No, nothing?
Paul?
Hi, Xavier.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Xavier. I'm a new coach. Thank you very much for doing this.
Yep.
So being a new coach, I feel it gives me the right to ask stupid questions.
That's great. I ask stupid questions all the time.
So as a coach, what is your flywheel?
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing. I knew that was coming, so I am prepared to show you that. I just need to get out of this document.
So while Paul's doing that, what do we think it should be? Go on, Javier, have a go. Maybe it could be like Cleveland or something else like that. Where would it start? You're on mute. You're giving all your secrets away on mute.
I'm giving it to the world. And I guess there is clearly a reinforcement mechanism between having clients with diverse issues and learning, and therefore attracting better clients, or attracting more clients with more diverse issues and learning more. But there must be, obviously there are many steps that I'm missing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Julieta?
Well, I was looking at the Cleveland one and wondering if the coach itself is the product. So, and then I'm saying myself, is it the tool? So I'm asking myself lots of questions and thinking, what really starts it off? I think you're probably right, Javier. It is clients, but so good clients who keep referring you, yes. So then your flywheel starts from that.
So
Cool.
I'm going to start with my...
Here he's got it. Now we'll find we're wrong, Javier, or something, but never mind. We had a good,
that's
good
not
go
true.
at it.
Julieta, you're rarely wrong to my experience. So I would challenge you on that. I'm going to start with my hedgehog concept, if that's okay. So
Yep.
for Cornerstone 3, my hedgehog concept, my reason for being is to positively change lives by achieving fullest human potential. What I want to be the best in the world at is building scalable elite teams that impact cultures in valuable companies. And my economic engine is revenue per hour.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just mine. Other people may have a different one from a coach, but after I met Mark Green, in 3.5, almost 4 years ago now, I had been working really hard to increasing my pricing, and I've done that. And his strategy is to work less and make more money. And I said, I like that strategy, so I'm going to take that one. I plagiarized that, and I haven't been working any less, but I have been making a lot more money because of raising my prices. And I've found my closing ratio is still the same.
Interesting.
I didn't switch this, sorry. My first step is offer unique and valuable growth system and tools. So in Minnesota, EOS is the primary coaching system. and I find it to be simplistic and wanting. And so I found that I was able to differentiate myself pretty quickly through the the Gravitas tool set and the 3HAG tool set and so forth. So and then just continue to learn and grow as an individual. The second step is a step I left out, and I knew I was doing it. I was doing it, but I didn't document it. And it is work only with coachable, mission-driven, growth-oriented CEOs. I should say who have capital, who have money, right? Because there was 1 year, it was probably I don't know, I've been doing this for 12 years, so it was probably 3 years ago that I actually started and stopped 3 clients in the course of 3 or 4 months with them. I fired them because they were not coachable, and they also didn't have the capital to invest. So I got lazy, I guess. So I added this step, and I will only work, and I make sure I ask, well, I challenge them on whether they're coachable and whether they have the capital to invest in ideas that will help them scale. Because if they won't, then I can't help them. Does that make sense? So that's a very, very important step for my flywheel. Deliver superior results and distinctive impact and lasting endurance. That comes right from Collins. That's my goal and my outcome. Ignite passionate responses. So I want to get my clients to be raving fans and do testimonials for me, and I be referenceable clients. So I can, and a lot of my clients, it's like, Paul, I will talk to anybody for you because of what you've done for me and my team and my business. So build deep customer loyalty. Those Collins would probably yell at me because I have too many. He says no more than 6. I've got 8. You could probably, put those 2 together. Build brand power, right? Just an example. I'm not bragging. I'm really blessed, but I've added 6 clients in the last 5 months because I've been around, and it's the end of the year. It's kind of our season, and people are wanting to come out of the pandemic, and they want to plan and get ready for next year. And it's all, one client came back after 7 years, and others were referrals, or they found me through the EO program or the other CEO roundtable groups. Raise fees and channel capital into content and tool development and personal development. So I have been doing that. I started at $4,000 a day. I'm up to $8,000 a day. Or if I don't do days, it's actually a month. So I have a retainer program. It's based on that. So it's almost $100,000 a year. I just did my first one at 9,000 a couple weeks ago. So, and I got it. And then replenish the qualified CEO pipeline. So always have to be replenishing and talking to CEOs. All right. I don't talk to, I'll talk to CEOs and those who know CEOs or can introduce me to them. Those are the only people I'll talk to unless it's for the good of the community and I'm doing something, I'm giving back. But when it comes to business, that I had to really focus my time and attention on that. So does that help at all, or?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. In your flywheel, how do you know that you deliver superior results and lasting endurance?
So for example, I was in a full day session today with a client I picked up a year ago, and he said, Paul, I want to sell my business, and I want to do it within a year and a half. And on the call today was the company acquiring him. And I was just telling my wife, his valuation based on his margin last year probably would have been about $6 million. His valuation this year is $18 million because we doubled his bottom line from 2.5% to 5%, and we grew his top line. And so the multiplier went from probably a 4 to a 6, and the cash went from a 2.5 to 5. And so all of a sudden he's up to 16, 18, 20 million. So he paid me $100,000, right? They made an extra $1 million year over year. So that's 10 times. But when it comes to the value created, it's 100 times on valuation. I hold myself to that standard. If I'm not bringing that kind of value, I don't belong there. I shouldn't be there. No one should ever question my fees. Now they question them coming in, right? But they never question them going out. So those are the metrics I use. And the other metric is creating freedom for them. My job is to help you create freedom. In other words, build a team of 8 players and teach those people to do the same thing, delegate and elevate. So you have the freedom to do what you want, when you want, how you want, whether it's in the business or outside the business, and then create enormous value for you and you can sell or not sell, and create options for you to either stay or not stay. I have a client I started at 30 million. They're at almost 100 million now, and they've decided not to sell. But they're financially independent, and they're having a blast, and they're hardly ever at their business. So those are the things I hold myself accountable to, and I say that going in. And I've had people say, well, I've talked to other coaches, they don't talk like you talk. I said, well, that's because they don't understand what I understand. It's about your freedom, and it's about the valuation of your business. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, if I can, that we were on, and get back to the workshop area. And we don't have any clients, I think, on the call right now, so it might not make sense to go through it. So I'll walk you through the steps of the workshop. And again, if you haven't, you want to buy the monograph and just, just own it, just absorb it, just study it left and right. I mean, one of the reasons I love doing this, I force myself to even get better at it. And because if you have to present or teach, you have to really learn it, right? And so I've delivered this a number of times to my clients, but I learned more in preparing for this presentation. And so the first step in capturing your flywheel is create a list of significant repeatable successes. All right. And when you first hear this, it's like, wow, that's kind of interesting. So yeah, just write them all down and get really clear on what's successful and what's not. Then do the opposite in step 2. Create a list of failures and disappointments. Why do I want to do that? Well, you'll know in a second, right? So create a list. And what I do is I break the team up and I have them work individually. I don't do group think here. I have them work individually on the leadership team because they're all going to come up with different things. And what happens is you'll find out what the common ones are, and then you'll find out what the outliers are, and they're both important. Then I'll say, okay, compare those lists, right? Compare those lists to each other and ask the question, what do these successes and disappointments tell us about the possible components of our underlying architecture of our flywheel? What are the commercial insights that we're learning? And I'm glad you asked the question to me about coaching flywheel, because I gave you the example that when I compared those failures that year to my successes, I realized I was agreeing to work with people I hadn't vetted well enough around their coachability and around their ability to invest in ideas, right? And one of them, I didn't evaluate their team, because what I do a 2-step process. I also say, okay, CEO, sounds like you and I are in alignment. Now I need to meet with you and your team. Why do you need to do that? To make sure they're also on board, so there's no blockers on the team that's going to get in the way. And one client, out of 5 team members, 4 of them were blockers. So I told the CEO, I said, either fire them all and get a new team, or we're done, because none of them wanted to do it. So I didn't vet the CEO well enough. I didn't for coachability and capital, and I didn't vet the team well enough for buy-in. And they didn't have any weigh-in, so there wasn't any buy-in. So I fixed that. So that's what changed my flywheel. So ask the question, what do these successes and disappointments tell us about the possible components of a flywheel? Last year with one of my great clients called Bovida, we did this, and the CEO did it by himself. I said, well, Sean, were you willing to share it? So we went around it and we started picking it apart. And we too found a step that was missing. They had an ambassador program. So in sales, you land and then you expand. They were losing clients after they landed them, and they didn't have account managers doing the ambassador program. They had the hunters who didn't have the time or the inclination to handhold the client to expand them. And so we agreed to create an ambassador program and hire account manager, and made that an important step in the flywheel. So we learned that our execution of our strategy was off because we didn't have the right people in the right seats. We didn't have the right seats in the bus at all. So we had to change our organizational design to comply with our strategy and be successful. Does that make sense? So step 3 is an important step. Step 4, is using the components, keeping the 4 to 6, start sketching the flywheel and start with the one at the top. Who are we trying to attract? Are we trying to attack? I showed you 2 types of flywheels. Are we trying to attract customers? Or are we trying to attract talent, right? Which will eventually attract the customer or the client. Find the component that's at the top of the flywheel and then decide what is next and so on. And again, that enthusiastic, propulsion forward, the logical next step is the critical aspect. What's the underlying? Thank you. Yeah, Julia, I'm sorry.
No worries.
I thank you for letting me know.
That's okay.
Yeah. So that next step, right, is starting to sketch it. And you want to make sure that when you're sketching it for yourself or for your client, that you are looking at the energy required to move forward, or that maybe look at it another way. It's the sucking sound. Is hey, I'm next. You're coming towards me. It's that logical energy to the next step. It just makes common sense. And then we want to, keep it simple, high level, 50,000 feet, and then test the flywheel against your list of successes and failures, and then score each component in the flywheel. And this is really important. And so last year with Bovida, when we did that, we realized that we were missing a key component, and then we started scoring them. And it's just like constraint management and manufacturing, right? Your system flows at the fluid dynamics. It flows at the tightest constraint in your system. So if any of these are low scores, then your flywheel is going to get stuck where it's the lowest score, and you should put your time and energy into that step. So with Bovida, we had a 0. We didn't even have the step in there. We had to add the step, we had to hire the people, and then we had to start training them. And so we had our flywheel was stuck. And, we thought we were doing great bringing in new clients, but we were losing them. And as we lose them, that's not good. It doesn't help our brand. It doesn't create success stories. So you want to figure that out, and then you want to grade them, and then it helps you and decide what you're going to do for your priorities over the next year. So then you want to test your flywheel, right? Again, and then you want to go out in the market, and then just want to keep turning and turning and staying focused on it. So when you look at, Amazon going to Amazon Web Services, it was the same flywheel. They had built infrastructure in their fulfillment. They had built infrastructure in their technology, and they were able to offer that infrastructure at a low cost because it was already being amortized over their core business. And so they were able to attract people based on low cost, and they kept on, and they used the same flywheel to grow both the fulfillment and the web services business. It was very, very much alike. So don't give up on the point there is don't give up on your underlying architecture. That's even more important than a product, idea, or service. And the verdict is clear over history, right? Slow, steady pressure equals success. Stick with it. So if you have a client, and many of them, the visionaries are, they can't stay on track, right? And as a result of that, they're chasing squirrels or shiny objects. They're not going to get the outputs of greatness, right? They're not going to get superior results. They're not going to get distinctive impact. They're not going to get lasting endurance. It's our job as coaches to help them stay focused and help them stay there. And this tool, this flywheel tool that Jim Collins blessed us with, is the key to making that happen. So with that, I'll just wrap up. And if there's time for any more questions, I'll take questions.
Paul, I have one quick question. With the COVID and the pandemic, right? We've seen a lot of industries and a lot of businesses have to make pivots just to stay alive.
Yep.
How do you make sure this is a good pivot and not just getting trapped in that doom loop that you were discussing?
Well, yeah, that goes back to, you've got to realize what are your core competencies that you have inside your business that would be applicable into the marketplace based on how the marketplace has been disrupted. So a good example is Timberline shingles, right? They made shingles like for the haunted house at Epcot, and at Disneyland, and they were going to furlough 70% of their staff, And then they realized they had the core competencies to build plastic face shields. And so within 2 weeks, they retooled their entire business to manufacture plastic face shields. And they went out and started talking to governors and mayors and the federal government, say, you need these right now. Will you, can we help you? Same with the automotive business, turning to use their core competencies to make ventilators. So it's about, and the people who don't do that, they don't have enough confidence or discipline or courage to go out to the marketplace. But it starts with evaluating the core competencies. But the flywheel doesn't change, right? You still do the same thing. It's a different product. It's not about the product. It's about keeping that flywheel focused, right? And so those are a couple of examples. What happens is it goes back to leadership. If leadership doesn't stay calm, because they're the thermostat, right? They determine the temperature, then no one else is going to stay calm. If they don't communicate and share information, then people are going to get anxious. So it starts with the leader. It starts shooting bullets. Once you realize the bullets are hitting, then you come out with the cannonball, and then you go forward and turn that flywheel.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for an excellent session today. Did anybody have any quick questions? If not, we are at the top of the hour, so we can let you go. And I hope that the rest of you have a great rest of your day.